In the fight against climate change, one of the biggest contributors is the construction industry. According to a United Nations study, it accounts for a staggering 37% of global emissions. In New Haven, Connecticut, one developer has a blueprint for limiting the carbon footprint of his buildings, including a first of its kind in the hospitality industry. Not many hotel developers would start the tour on the roof.
Well, this is where it begins, because this is how we're making power with just the sun.
You might call architect Bruce Redmond Becker a proud papa, eager to shine light on his new baby, the Hotel Marcel, and the power behind it.
Well, you install them, and they make power for 25 years or more.
There are more than 1,000 solar panels covering the roof and parking canopies below.
It defines the future of sustainable hospitality.
The building was designed by one of Becker's heroes, Marcel Breuer, the architect behind the UNESCO headquarters in Paris and the Whitney Museum in New York. From 1970 to 1999, it served as headquarters for a rubber company and later a tire manufacturer, but then sat vacant for 2 decades. In 2020, Becker bought it for just over $1 million.
It was twice voted the ugliest building in Connecticut, but at the same time, folks that are passionate about brutalist architecture saw it as this iconic building. People were coming from Europe to look at it because it really is a very cool building. It's like a piece of modern art that sort of is suspended in the sky. And so I passed by it and thought there has to be a solution to remake this building in a way that honors its architectural legacy, but also sort of brings it into the future.
Recycling existing structures has been on his punch list for more than a decade. In Hartford and New York, Becker transformed historic buildings into apartment complexes. Compared to new construction, conversions cut carbon emissions by 50 to 70%.
You know, architects love to play with their houses, right?
His home in Westport, Connecticut was his testing ground.
I got rid of my gas hot water heater and I put in a air source heat pump hot water heater. And I even put in about 64 solar panels.
At a cost of about $60,000. But thanks to a 30% tax credit, he says it paid for itself in 4 years.
And then Hotel Marcel came out of this.
It took more than 2 years and $30 million, but Hotel Marcel opened its doors in 2022. It's now part of Hilton's Tapestry collection. Not many hotels open to the interstate.
No. No, that's a building we inherited.
Ben Webster is general manager.
We have found that we are now attracting a lot of organizations and conferences because of our sustainability initiatives, where they can host these kind of zero waste, zero emission meetings and events.
Under the Energy Department's new criteria, a zero emissions building must be energy efficient, free of on-site emissions from energy use, and powered solely by clean energy. The goal is to reduce greenhouse gases by 65% in the next decade and 90% by the year 2050. The Marcel is the only hotel in the U.S. to earn the Energy Department's Platinum rating. That's not gas?
No, ma'am. Completely electric powered.
Chef Megan Gill's kitchen is fully sustainable.
I think it's really our focus on our day-to-day efforts and how we move differently throughout the space.
Which includes composting and repurposing food waste.
And then other things like watching our water usage, maintaining a radius of 250 miles from where we buy food from to eliminate our carbon footprint.
On the outside, triple glazed windows reduce noise and improve insulation.
This is our latest innovation.
And in the laundry room,
the laundry energy is the biggest single component of energy use and typically carbon footprint for most hotels.
A first of its kind innovation in the U.S.
This is a heat pump hot water heater, which makes cold air. It actually pulls the heat out of the air and puts it in the hot water. So we basically get free hot water, and we also cool the room at the same time.
But the game changer fueling it all.
And this is sort of the the hub of energy for the whole hotel.
The Hotel Marcel's microgrid,
It's a really smart way to power a building.
with inverters that switch between solar and battery power on demand.
On a summer day in the middle of the day, we actually export power to the grid from our solar panels. We also have batteries that we can pull power from, and that allows us to operate off-grid and also sell power back to the utility when there's a peak demand for the system.
On overcast days like this one, the hotel also draws on renewable green energy from the public utility.
The orange is actually the load of the buildings.
Becker tracks that usage from his phone,
So right now we're getting a combination of power from the utility, from the solar.
hoping to negotiate more space for solar in the parking lot, which he says would wean the hotel from that dependence.
This is a very easily replicable approach to making hotels and commercial buildings that don't contribute to the climate change problem that we have.
Becker believes the Hotel Marcel can be a model, moving the hospitality industry into a greener future.
Sounds like we have to build on what we already have.
Absolutely. I mean, history is a big part of what we have to think about going forward, because that's really defines our identity. You know, if we don't think about where we came from and what that means, you know, we're sort of lost. And I think our challenge is to build on the past, but in ways that make for a brighter future.
You know, hospitality accounts for about 1% of global carbon emissions, and he says this could really put a dent in, the greenhouse gas impact if just the hospitality industry jumps into this wholeheartedly.
Is it money and the idea that people want to build their own thing and they don't want to sit on an existing footprint?
Probably a combination of both, but just sort of recapturing the notion of taking what's old and making it new again.
Right.
Instead of just building something completely
Yeah.
new. All right.
Bring the roof a little more this way. Hold it. Back a little. Back. Easy now. Forward a
Who doesn't love the Flintstones? We've been building with stone since the beginning of time, and some of the globe's most iconic buildings have intricate carvings. But because of cost, in new construction, stone has largely vanished in favor of glass. Now, a New York-based startup is trying to make stone more accessible again. CBS News correspondent Bradley Blackburn is here with more. Bradley, good morning.
Dana, good morning. This startup is called Monumental Labs. They believe we're about to see a renaissance of new sculptures ornamenting city skylines. The key to making it happen is powerful technology that's just beginning to carve out the possibilities. Inside this century-old warehouse among dusty piles of stone, this piece of machinery is shaping the future of architecture. It really is monumental. It's huge.
Yeah, people are surprised when they're standing next to it.
When it comes to life, it has the power to turn stone into art.
It's been running for 40 hours plus already.
Micah Springett is the founder of Monumental Labs, the first company in the U.S. using 7-axis industrial robots, often used on auto assembly lines, to create ornamental stonework for buildings. The detail is down here.
Details down here. It can move into any position you want. It's like a human arm. We'll actually start with something larger like this to take off huge chunks, and this will spin at a faster rate. And then we'll get down to the smaller ones. And then we'll go down all the way to a 2mm piece that can get into all the tiny bits. The robot will stop, put the bit back, pull out the next one, test it to make sure it's got the right length, and start up again.
Until the 1930s, ornate stone was widely used on structures around the country, hand-carved by low-paid immigrant craftsmen. Today, custom stonework is expensive and rare, and Springett says badly needed. You've called current architecture bland, soulless. You said there's a tyranny of panes of glass.
Tyranny of the flat plane. We are beholden to these machines that work only when you put the same input out and get the same output over and over and over again.
Springett's background is in tech, not architecture. But he started sculpting as a hobby and saw the potential to bring the spirit of a startup to a medium as old as time. What do you think Michelangelo would think about this?
Michelangelo would have a studio of multiple robots, and he would be making 10 times as much sculpture. And he'd be doing stuff that was bigger and more complex because he could.
The complex projects at Monumental Labs look like this. Replacing balcony facades on a historic Manhattan hotel. They were originally hand-carved in 1880, but deteriorated over the decades. The old balconies are laser scanned and digitally rebuilt by a graphic artist before 12-foot slabs of stone are put in front of the robot.
Yeah, I think so.
At the end, there's still a human touch.
So on this piece, I'm going to be working into getting really deep into these grooves.
Sculptor Liza Little is used to hand tools. She's now learning to work with a robot.
Even though the machine does so much of the dock removal, having the hand of an individual artist to really bring it all together and make it art.
How much does one of these machines cost?
This machine, all in, $300,000 to $400,000.
The payoff, he says, is that they create flourishes in a fraction of the time and at a fifth of the cost of traditional methods. It brings the price of stone back to earth.
We should be able to do anything we did in 1911 or 1890 today for less cost. I think we're going to see a whole new world of beautifully crafted stone buildings.
Do you think they're onto something here?
Completely.
Architect Craig Copeland has never worked with Springett, but he's long used stone in his buildings, including here.
So this is Brookfield Place. Yes. It used to be called World Financial Center.
This 80s era structure with its famous winter garden was destroyed on 9/11.
Where we had 1 year to...
Copeland helped rebuild and expand it, using some 200,000 square feet of stone.
This was inspired by the Spanish Steps, which is a very public, open space that allows you to transcend and see from a number of vantage points.
Copeland is a sculptor himself and says stonework in the future will look different because new tools have new potential.
The capabilities of working stone today would allow us to make something that's even more expressive and plastic and more flowing.
Copeland says stone is increasingly in demand for high-end building projects. It's valued for its beauty and a smaller carbon footprint. Copeland says mining stone produces fewer emissions than mixing concrete. It's more durable and a better insulator than facades made entirely of glass and steel.
Thinking about the longer term, not just the moment, but thinking about our kids and the future, stone is a great choice from that standpoint.
But not everyone agrees we're about to enter a new stone age.
Being in the city, it's a privilege for architects.
Architecture professor Damoun Bolasani sees a different future.
Is stone a major building material for the future?
No. It's just a matter of competition with new material, and it's going to get worse for stone.
At City College's Spitzer School of Architecture, they're pushing the limits of materials like concrete, using chemistry to make them stronger and more environmentally friendly.
The idea for architects is to just explore these new materials, being aware of future of construction and the material that's going to be available.
He thinks robotics will be shaping these new materials into all kinds of buildings. But stone carving, even by robot, will remain a luxury.
Robots and advanced manufacturing could help to bring the price a little bit lower, but still the source is a problem. Like the stone is expensive. The best market for stone carving, it would be in historical preservation, I think.
Monumental Labs is moving quickly. They plan 100 robots within 5 years.
You see this happening all across the country?
I see it happening anywhere that values great architecture.
The piece we saw take shape has now taken its place in the middle of Manhattan. The company's first commission cemented in the city, a monument to a new way of building.
We are now limitless in what we can create, and we're creating amazing new canon of sculptures and works that don't necessarily look like they did in the past. They will look sometimes super photorealistic. They will look sometimes abstract, but it will be whatever we can imagine.
Stone is just the best.
It is.
I mean, as you said, it's very expensive, but it just looks And it's just great.
Yeah, no, it lasts. I love the idea that it enriches, the spaces that are now in this modern world.
And what's interesting, too, is that they're hiring human artists to do this.
Right,
And so
be a part of it.
The stonework that's created today will reflect the diversity of artists in a way that's different than it was 100 years ago. So we can only really begin to imagine what this future might look like.
I would like to go back in time, though, and ask Michelangelo if he would, in fact, be using a robot. I'd be fascinated.
Yeah, I would.
I don't know. I
mean, he might to make the basic structure, and then he puts his flourishes on.
Right.
Well, maybe for economics, because this company says they can lower the price by 20%, or it's a fifth of the cost now, and they think they can get it even lower in the years ahead.
Crazy.
Very interesting. Bradley, thank you. This morning, we are taking a look at mass timber. It's the name for wood used to construct larger and larger buildings, even high rises and airports. Yes, high-rise buildings made not of steel or concrete, but wood. Can something like that possibly be safe? Can it be sustainable long-term? It's a fascinating subject. So to explore, we went to the center of America's mass timber movement, Oregon. Wow. Whoa. Jeez. That is a lot of wood. Walking into Portland, Oregon's new airport. Pretty wild. Is like seeing a version of the future, firmly rooted in the past. 9 acres? Over us.
Correct.
All wood.
All wood.
Curtis Robenhold is the executive director of the Port of Portland, the man who's led a $2 billion project to build this airport.
It's pretty exciting, and you can start to see it all coming together now.
The dream is to make this more than just a place to take off or land. You want people to come here just to hang out?
Would not hurt. The idea of the space in front of us here is sort of auditorium seating where you have more of a community space. And how that's used, we'll have to see how that plays out. But it's to be more of a community space rather than a transactional space.
All of this is possible because of mass timber, which is not all that different than the kind of wood you find at the store. Except it's been bonded and pressed into huge pieces, used as walls and floors that can be installed all at once, which for one, dramatically speeds up construction time. What is this?
This is cross-laminated timber. Like if you went in the Lowe's or Home Depot, you see all the 2x6s. This is just a whole bunch of 2x6s glued together.
Is this the future?
Absolutely.
Chris Evans is the president of TimberLab, one of the firms pioneering the technology. TimberLab manufactured the airport's roof. Mass timber is increasingly being used in museums, community centers, office buildings, even this 25-story condo in Milwaukee. When you mention this to people, they're like, why would you build a skyscraper of wood or of an apartment building?
Yeah.
It's going to burn down.
Yeah, that's the first reaction. And honestly, the first, 8 years ago when I was first introduced to it on an office building, that was my first reaction. Once you really start to understand what it is and you don't just think of it as wood, you think of it as a highly sophisticated structural system that has this natural fire resistive quality to it, then you start to see that, oh man, this is a game changer.
TimberLab says today's treated mass timber can be as strong as steel and more fire resistant. To prove it, they do testing like this. Never mind the aesthetic advantage.
If we think about the workplace, nobody wants to go to work in a 9-foot acoustic tile ceiling with a bunch of cubicles and everything, some version of white or tan out there, right? That's
we want beauty.
Yeah, there's movies based on that type of work environment.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
You gonna start quoting Office Space?
No, I won't.
When done right, advocates say mass timber can be a win-win long-term for everyone.
You can actually look up on the roof and you can identify where each of these pieces came from. It's a system called track and trace, and the folks who did it, honestly, it's the first time it's been done. It's really astonishing. I think it's something we're going to see in the future around wood and increasing use of wood.
It has to be more expensive that way.
We thought it was going to be a lot more expensive, and I would say it was marginally more expensive, but really it's worth it.
Some critics wonder whether right now it is worth it. They say too many mass timber projects today are a form of greenwashing, often relying on irresponsible harvesting methods. Every time I see a clear-cut site, it looks apocalyptic.
Yeah, I mean, and they take a while to grow back to any semblance of a forest.
Sean Stevens is the executive director of Oregon Wild. He took us to a forest 90 minutes outside Portland. The timber from this site was used for a project in Washington state that was billed as climate friendly. Was it climate friendly?
You really can't call clear cutting, especially at this scale, climate friendly.
Do you think skyscrapers made of mass timber are a good idea?
Can a big mass timber building be built and have it be green? Yes, but right now, mostly mass timber is being used as a way to greenwash existing bad practices.
Critics of mass timber say it's greenwashing.
I wouldn't say it's greenwashing at all. American forests are producing more timber than we're consuming. You know, a natural part of forest growth is to have some devastation, landslides, wildfires. Things happen where the forest regenerates and grows.
But this isn't natural, it's man-made if you're clear cutting.
Absolutely, and I'm not a proponent of saying, yes, go clear cut. What I'd say is subscribing to sustainable forestry practices that are understood and known. Those are in alignment with long-term forest health.
Can you ensure that the timber used here in this mass timber is responsibly harvested?
Absolutely, yeah, without a doubt.
The Portland airport acknowledges they did get some of their wood from smaller clear cuts, which many forestry experts say are currently unavoidable. But there are ways to mitigate the harm, like allowing longer growth of trees, doing smaller cuts, and leaving a larger percentage of the trees untouched, which the airport says they did. As new, beautiful mass timber structures push higher every day, builders are being pushed to source them the right way. You think this is going to be a big deal in every state?
There's more projects in the Northeast now than there are in the Pacific Northwest, as far as like coming online or being designed. And that's surprising to me. I couldn't believe that. And now you're really starting to see this spread across the whole country.
It is impressive to watch all this, and there are some huge environmental benefits potentially if it's done the right way, but there's a lot of attention on all this right now. You've probably seen in random places these bigger buildings.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I told you, I had read something about a place that was going up and saw that it was wood and thought, this is odd, this seems odd. I thought about fire safety, which you addressed. The environmental concerns, there are the two sides to it, obviously, but really interesting.
I wonder how high they can go.
That's the question.
Yeah.
There's a lot of regulations in a lot of cities right now, and they're trying to move those so they slowly creep higher and higher. This morning, we're taking a look at how architecture is changing to respond to the dangers posed by these storms. Here's Manuel Bojorquez.
Hurricane Ian pummeled southwest Florida in September 2022.
The wind just howling through there.
A Category 4 storm that killed 156 people and left behind $112 billion in damage. It was the first real test for Fort Myers' Luminary Hotel, which had gone up 2 years earlier, somehow only losing the U in its sign during the storm. For those who built it, it's less somehow than no-how.
The building's purposely straightforward so that there's no complicated geometries, no alcoves, no recesses. All those places are opportunities for wind forces to build and create additional stresses on the building. The ground floor of the building is several feet higher.
Architect Jonathan Ray was part of the team. We walked along streets that were flooded with storm surge during Ian, but the hotel's first floor is 9 feet above ground level, which prevented flooding inside. Backup generators are 15 feet high on a raised platform, which kept the hotel running. One easy-to-miss detail, a slight bend in the structure, which engineer Amir Agajani says adds strength, as he demonstrated with a piece of paper.
It can't stand on its side. It can't stand upright, for that matter. Right? If you put a simple bend in it, we're not adding any material, and all of a sudden, with that simple bend, it stays up.
Since no building can be hurricane-proof, hurricane resilience is the goal.
I think a lot of people will think this is all great, but it must be costly to build like this.
Yes, good point. I like to think of it as invest now or pay later, because what you're doing now is you're creating value.
And the glaciers are melting.
Peering even further into the future, students at Florida International University's Architecture School are looking at another problem: sea level rise, expected to flood much of South Florida by the year 2100.
It's just a matter of time.
It's a matter of time, and it can go quick.
Which is why Professor Thomas Spiegelhalter's students are using AI to plan cities of the future, raised over water, with structures that mimic shapes found in nature that can withstand hurricanes too.
We have to be open and understand that being truly efficient and designing optimized, self-sufficient, resilient structures means we need to learn from nature.
Postdoctoral candidate Sarah Pezish is using 3D printing to develop what she calls biotiles to reduce coastal erosion.
This is the idea, was not just creating a wall or a barrier, but also like a landscape that does multiple things. Reduce erosion, hopefully filter the water, and then integrate with nature.
A look into a future where climate change and hurricanes continue to reshape the landscape. For CBS Saturday Morning, Manuel Bojorquez, Miami.
Brilliant use of technology. And I say this a lot on our show. I'm so glad there are really smart people out there and creative.
Some of those images at the end look like they were from Avatar, too. Those beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
And it's interesting, they say there's no such thing as hurricane-proof,
right.
But there is very, very hurricane-resistant.
Yeah,
right. Pay for it now, and you don't have the huge cost of trying to rebuild later.
The construction and demolition industry in the U.S. sends an estimated 145 million tons of waste to our national landfills, accounting for a quarter of all waste. Janet Shamlian shows us how a mission in an historic American city is giving building materials a new life.
If historic homes are the fabric of Savannah, Georgia, Mae Boley is the thread, salvaging precious materials from those about to be torn down.
I got bit by the old building bug, and the next thing I knew, I was a warrior for these old building materials, trying to do everything I could to keep them out of the landfill.
Check out the tight growth rings on the bottom piece. It's irreplaceable wood, hundreds of years old.
You can't find this at a new lumber yard.
The kind repurposed Savannah salvages when it convinces owners to deconstruct a building instead of demolish it.
Why is this important right now?
Construction and demolition is the single biggest contributor to American landfills. So this is an urgent area to address our current practices.
From hinges and doorknobs to clawfoot tubs, window frames, and that rare wood, it's all sold at their warehouse. In 5 years, they've kept 3,000 tons of material out of landfills.
This is hardware. This is our house jewelry.
What's old often ends up in new construction.
The built environment holds so much of our history. And so when you lose it, we lose a lot of the stories and the connections that go with that.
The nonprofit is an all-women plus venture.
So try to hold down here.
In an industry where more than 90% of construction workers are men.
There are barriers, whether they're formal or informal. And removing those barriers helps women break into a really rewarding industry and start really long, productive, healthy careers.
And an alternative to bulldozers and wrecking balls.
There is light and there's beauty in what we're able to do. And I think, you know, the broader message of what we're doing is that we're doing something with intention.
The nuanced work of preserving history, piece by precious piece. For CBS Saturday Morning, Janet Shamlian, Savannah, Georgia.
It's been nearly 5 years since a fire destroyed Paris' Notre Dame Cathedral. 2 days after the fire, French President Emmanuel Macron set a 5-year deadline to rebuild the 800-year-old landmark. That goal is close to being met, thanks to a nearly $1 billion reconstruction effort, which includes the work of an American craftsman. Elaine Cobb has his story.
Last year, Hank Silver was running a small carpentry business in Massachusetts. Through a contact in France, he was offered a rare chance to join a team in Normandy preparing timber to rebuild the nave of Notre Dame.
I could not say no to that opportunity. It's an opportunity that happens once in a lifetime, wouldn't even be the right term. It's once in a millennium, really.
The monumental task of restoring Notre Dame after the 2019 fire called for artisans skilled in traditional building methods.
We first hewed all the logs using axes, in order to recreate that rippled finish that you were able to see in the original cathedral in the 13th century framing.
There were unexpected challenges.
The architects asked us to reproduce all of the deformations that had accrued over 800 years. So the ridge is not a straight line, and so we had to follow this curvature.
Then he came to Paris to set the timber trusses in place.
Many carpenters came from United States, from England, from Denmark, from Spain, because they were fond of these techniques, fond of oak. They come to work on Notre Dame, and it's a very fantastic spirit.
There's still a lot of work left to be done to restore Notre Dame to its former glory, but everyone here is confident it will be ready for the planned reopening in December.
4 months ago, the spire rose again into the Paris skyline, topped with a recreation of the original gold cross and rooster. The rooster holds several holy relics, but also...
But they created a second chamber, and it's got a scroll with the names of everybody who worked on the cathedral.
Oh wow,
Isn't
there are
that cool?
names in there.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That is supremely cool.
Yeah, it's right up there.
Okay.
Protecting the city.
With his work on the restoration almost done, Silver says he'd like to stay in France. He took advantage of a site visit by the French president to plead his case.
I did hand Emmanuel Macron a letter requesting French citizenship. He has not been texting me every day, much to my disappointment.
Hank Silver remains hopeful and says he's looking forward to seeing Notre Dame reopen at the end of this year. For CBS Saturday Morning, Elaine Cobb, Paris.
We've got to get Hank Silver his French citizenship.
It is amazing that they're reproducing the deformation.
That's
Right.
Like all the things that sort of became misshaped over 800 years, they have to recreate that part of it. That's so cool.
Fantastic. Very cool.
So cool.
Yeah. For nearly 70 years, stained glass windows in Washington's National Cathedral depicted Confederate leaders. They've been gone now for 6 years, and this week, new windows telling a different story were unveiled. Adriana Diaz got an early look at the new designs and their new meaning.
If the walls could talk at Washington's National Cathedral, they'd recount some of our nation's most profound moments.
The best father a son or daughter could have.
Where we're reminded our leaders are only human. But these walls have also upheld a stain in stained glass. Tributes to Confederate generals Robert E. Lee, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, and their flag. They were removed in 2017, and this past week, their replacements were revealed.
I couldn't miss it. Wanted to be here to witness it.
I've never seen anything like it, so I'm like, wow.
It's a celebration of the Black experience. A still image that captures the kinetic energy of protesting in the pursuit of justice.
It is pretty brilliant, pretty bright.
It's glowing. It's the work of renowned Chicago artist Kerry James Marshall, whose pieces can go for millions. His price for this? $18.65, a nod to slavery's end.
I think these windows simply announce themselves to the passerby in a way that most of the other windows in the cathedral don't.
Also, unlike the other windows here, there's a wheelchair, no faces, and...
In a church, you're so used to looking up at the windows and seeing white skin. And seeing black skin here, it's almost like you have to do a double take.
I don't think these windows exclude anybody. I think the activity and what they're engaged in is something that everybody can partake in.
There's a different light that comes out of that bay than comes out of any of the other bays here at the cathedral.
Randy Hollerith, Dean of the National Cathedral, says not everyone agreed with the change.
There was a lot of resistance that we were removing history. Part of what we tried to do was to have those conversations, and then just to know that we were doing what we thought was absolutely the best thing.
Below are words by poet Elizabeth Alexander, who performed at President Obama's first inauguration.
For a lot of people, poetry goes over their heads.
I do know that a lot of people get nervous around poetry, but poetry's just words and we all have them. The final line of the poem, "May this portal be where the light comes in," that can illuminate the beauty of the past and also sometimes the untruths of the past.
Funeral services are held at Washington Cathedral.
Their art will live on in a place that serves as a spiritual home for the nation, where Dr. Martin Luther King gave his last sermon.
The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
A permanence that leaves this poet speechless.
They will outlive me by a very, 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 very long measure. And what that reminds me of is the power of art. And what that means is actually beyond words for me right now.
Carrie, I see you nodding.
To really make a contribution to the transformation of the nation towards the goals that it had established and set for itself, liberty and justice for all. I don't think I could have asked for anything more meaningful to have done in my life.
For CBS Saturday Morning, Adriana Diaz, Washington.
I love how much he charged.
Yeah.
$18.65.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they are very proud of the gesture, and they see it as a gesture of being opened, and it is wonderful to see.
Yeah, they're beautiful too. Absolutely beautiful,
Yeah.
not just the message that they send.
Absolutely.